So thanks everyone for joining us this morning, this evening, this afternoon, whatever it is for you. This is our fourth iCall, which is a series of calls, kind of online seminars that we've been putting together for the broader M&E community at IDE, but also wanting to make this a broad platform for learning across the organization. And today we're going to be looking at the experience of the sanitation marketing scale-up program in Cambodia, the first phase, and touch on just a few of the things that we did in terms of measurement for that project. And what we want to do is look at it sort of from two perspectives, at least. One being the measurement perspective of interest from an M&E point of view. Just saying, given the parameters that we had for this project, how did we go about actually trying to measure the impact and the performance of the project? And what did we learn from that? And how is it actually being applied in practice? And it's great to have Michel Doguet on the seminar as well. He's the new director for the Cambodia SMSU program, I think as of January, February. So welcome, Michel. Of course, he'll be able to speak a bit in discussion, I hope, to how some of this information is being used or can be used to inform the strategy for the program. So we want to look at both how did we go about measuring, and then what were the results, and how have we actually applied those results into the strategic and operational planning for the project. And just a couple of housekeeping notes. Chris had mentioned already, but just for any of those joining, at this point we have people on mute just to save all of the background noise that we often get on kind of group calls. But if you have a question or want to contribute, you can use the chat box. You should see a chat box, I think, over on the right side of your screen, and you can put a message in there. Chris is monitoring the messages coming in, and we'll try and respond to that. The way that we'll run this is I'll run through, which we'll keep fairly brief, and then go into a period of discussion where it'll be much more driven by your questions, and we can dive in and have a little bit more discussion of the material that we've presented. So I guess I'll just pause there for 1 second and just see, Chris, from your perspective, we're good to go here?
I think everything is good. Just if anybody can't see the screen share, let me know. You should be able to see some kids and the name of the slide or the name of the presentation. So shoot me a message if you can't, and I can help you get it up and running while Steve's going.
Great, thank you. So we'll get started here. As I said, this is a presentation on looking at the experience of the sanitation marketing scale-up program in Cambodia, the first phase, which ran from the end of 2011 up to the end of October of this past year, 2014. And as many of you know, we had a quite successful pilot in Cambodia in 2010, just into the first part of 2011, and that spurred investment from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the Stone Family Foundation, the Water and Sanitation Program, the World Bank, into now taking this up to scale. And so the program rolled out over 7 provinces in Cambodia with the goal of reaching 70,000 households over its 3-year period with new latrines. But the way that it was set up is that there was actually the satisfactory target of 70,000, but also an excellent target set of 140,000. And so that was kind of the aspirational target to meet. And there were incentives rolled in also to meet that target. So measurement was very important for this project from the get-go, both for learning and also for accountability. With those targets built in, we needed to have a very reliable system for measuring against the various targets that were there, being able to report on that. And so what I want to do is take a look at 3 particular aspects of the measurement. And as I said before, dive into some of the methods. How did we do this? And also, what did we find, and how is that being applied now to how we're thinking about the program? So the first part is sales and business analysis. Second thing we'll look at is measuring installation and use. And the third thing we want to look at is a specific study done on willingness to pay. Where we're looking at how much people were willing to pay for latrines and also the impact of sanitation finance on that willingness to pay. And then we'll have, as I said, time for discussion. So we'll start with the sales and business analysis. And this was really about tracking the rollout of sales of latrines across latrine businesses, which we knew as shorthand LBO, which is latrine business owner. And initially, IDE was working with latrine business owners directly and providing them with training and support and coaching in setting up sales teams that would go out and sell the latrines. And I think it all started from saying, okay, the latrine businesses are really the kind of the main point of contact. They're going to be the main driver of sales, and so we'll try and equip them to sell, giving them better selling techniques, etc. Quickly realized these guys are really good at making things out of concrete, but maybe not always the best at going out and selling. And so then the program encouraged them to build up their own sales force of sales agents who became known as sanitation teachers, and encouraging them to then share commission with those sanitation teachers in exchange for the additional sales that these sanitation teachers would drive. And so the strategy kind of shifted over the course of the initial part of the project from being very focused on the latrine business to then having a strong focus on the sanitation teacher and the skills that they needed. And so what we did in terms of the interactions and tracking the sales, we had research assistants. Pavorchnia is the woman on the right in the photo here. She's meeting with one of the latrine business owners, and they would go and meet with latrine business owners on a bi-weekly basis, and still are. And the latrine business owners were tracking sales in what they call the big book. And this is a record book that IDE put together and then trained the LBOs, the latrine business owners, on keeping the records in here, where they would keep the customer names, contact order, so what types of rings and other components were purchased, and the date of order, date of delivery. So they were to keep these records in their book, and this was sort of the kind of first instance of where the sales data were being kept. And then the research assistants, like Vorchnia, show up, and they have mobile devices, and they enter into their mobile device summary information. So they select the latrine business on the mobile device, and then they put in the date, just defaults to today, and the particular sanitation teacher who had made the sales, and then they just record the total sales sold into each commune. So in Cambodia, you've got provinces, they're broken into districts, districts into communes, and then within communes you have villages. And so we were recording the summary data at a commune level. That was considered to be good enough granularity of data in terms of the summaries that they were collecting. Now, we did actually have somebody in the head office who was then translating the photos into much more granular village level data. We've since moved away from that level of granularity in terms of capturing the summary data, just because we found we weren't using village level data to the extent that would really justify the additional cost of putting in all of that very granular information. So at this point, the delivery summary on a biweekly basis captures by latrine business and sanitation teacher the number of latrines that have been delivered based on the big book, this large record book. And you can see why it's called the big book when you look at the table there. It is a big book. And initially we had some issues with latrine businesses keeping good records, as you might imagine. But there was a lot of work with the business development coordinators, who were the key IDE staff working with the LBOs, to really support and coach the LBOs on keeping those records. And it was part of their overall business training. And so these data then, when they're entered, go into Salesforce, and then that allows us to track over time the buildup of sales. And so we had fairly decent, almost real-time information coming in with these biweekly visits. And as you can see over the course of the project, this was a very successful effort, which won't really come as news to most of you on this call. But as I said, we had the satisfactory target of 70,000, and then we had the excellent target of 140,000 that we had set in cooperation with the Gates Foundation. And by the end of the project, had gotten over even that excellent target, which was really tremendous performance. I should note too, because there were incentives involved for the iDEs staff who were going out and working with the STs and the latrine businesses, we had to be very careful about data verification. And also because we ourselves were being held highly accountable for this, and there was an external audit that was being done. We had to be very certain internally that the numbers that we were putting out were based on reality. So the first part of verification was really matching what was in the big book to what was in our system. We had somebody at head office who was checking the photos coming in and making sure that those matched the summary information that was in the system, that all checked out. So that was the first part. The second part was then, based on that photo, you've got a list of the names of the customers. Now, it wasn't really worth our while to put the names into our system digitally, but we had the photos. And based on the photos, we were then able to take a random sample of customers and just do a rapid follow-up to check, does this person actually exist? Did they actually purchase a latrine? Does it match up with what we have in our records? And then a little bit further on, we had a customer follow-up survey where, using that same list of customers, selected a random sample of customers, actually went out, visited them, to see whether they had installed the latrine, whether they were using it, and to get some basic customer satisfaction feedback, etc. So based on the sales data, like I say, we were able to then track the progress of the project in terms of sales. And we also, on a quarterly basis, collected information about the business itself. And so we had a small kind of form that we used with the latrine businesses. This also went into Salesforce under the record of that particular business. We had a record for each latrine business in Salesforce, a record for each sanitation teacher, and so under each record you could add additional information that was relevant. So every quarter the research assistants went out and filled out this form, and then that information gets logged in Salesforce underneath the appropriate latrine business. And there we were looking at things like staffing, investments that they had made in the past quarter in capital investments for molds and other productive assets. We looked at any financing that they had taken in the past quarter. We were really just trying to get a sense of what level of investment were the latrine businesses themselves bringing into this. So one thing was to track sales, but it was also looking at to what degree does this seem to be taking hold? Are businesses really taking this on and growing it themselves with their resources? And so based on that, then we were able to get information on pricing. That was also in the quarterly survey, and start to try and estimate the cost buildup within those prices. So in broad strokes, the materials, we knew kind of the average materials costs to make the toilets, the different types. The labor costs we were able to estimate. The transport, as you can see there, is a bit of a plug figure. We didn't have good data on transport, and so we used kind of a rough approximation there. Commission we were able to calculate because we knew all of the sales that had gone through a sanitation teacher, and we also knew from the questionnaires with the latrine businesses what they paid for commission. It was usually, there was not a huge amount of variation between latrine businesses. The normal commission that was paid was around $2 and $2.50. Now here you can see the commission amount is quite a bit less, but that's because we took the commissions paid divided by all the sales, whether they were commission sales or not. And so that includes, sales that were made by the latrine businesses without any sanitation teacher involved, so without any commission. But that just gives you the average overall. And then the margin we calculate based on the known pricing minus the known costs to try and get a sense of how much the latrine business was actually taking home at the end of the day. And as you can see, there's quite a large variation in the margins that LBOs were earning. And the prices were a fair bit higher in the northern provinces. So the northern provinces are the first four there: Banti Minche, Odra Minche, Siem Reap, and Kampong Tom. And then in the south, Preveng, Kandal, and Svaideng. And so in the north, this was more of a new introduction, and there were also, for the most part, I believe, higher levels of subsidies going on there as well, which may have been a factor on some of the pricing. Then what we did in the analysis was broke the latrine businesses into quintiles. So this is basically taking all the latrine businesses and then dividing them into 5 equal groups. And so we did that on the basis of monthly sales, monthly unit sales. And then what we did was we sort of compared across those different quintiles, what's the distribution of some of these different variables that we're looking at. And so you can see here, between the 5th quintile, which is the top quintile, so those who had the highest level of monthly sales, and even the 4th quintile, the next lowest one, the next highest one, there's a considerable amount of variation. And so one of the things that this told us was that we had sort of a smaller number of very high functioning latrine businesses, and then we had kind of a longer tail of latrine businesses that were operating at a bit of a lower level. What was interesting actually was we found too that the dropout rate was pretty high based on latrine businesses that we took on in terms of training and support. After 2 years, about 60% of those businesses were no longer selling toilets, so they had become inactive as far as toilet sales were concerned. Now, I should note, a lot of these businesses, they have other things going on. They sell rings for wells and culverts. They sell pillars for houses. They sell spirit houses, which are the little shrines that most households have outside of their home. So it wasn't necessarily like these were going out of business, but they were obviously looking at the latrine business and kind of saying, I don't know if this is really something that I want to put a lot of investment into at this point. And so it's clear we had kind of this smaller group of very high-functioning LBOs. They were getting lots of sales, and they were staying in the game for a lot longer. We had a number of latrine businesses that kind of dipped their toe in, made a few sales, and then we didn't really hear from them again. In Compass Lab did a very interesting study alongside this. So this has a lot of quantitative information, but they had looked at a lot of qualitative information, trying to understand what was going on in the supply chain. One of the things that they found was that relative to other things that the latrine businesses sold, the toilets were not necessarily offering a huge amount of profitability, but what they were offering was a ready access to cash flow. And so it seemed like a lot of LBOs were maybe jumping in for a short period of time, relatively low overhead, and were able to make some sales, get some cash in, especially during times of the year when cash flow had been a little bit low from some of their other businesses, but weren't necessarily seeing this as a long-term investment for themselves. Whereas then we had some businesses that clearly saw this as something that they wanted to really invest in and really grow. We also wanted to look at the role that the sanitation teachers played in driving sales. And so here you can see, and I apologize, the titles are kind of reversed on the bottom, but the blue is the total monthly unit sales, and then the gray is the sales that we were getting through sanitation teachers in the months that they were active. So what we did was we took for each sanitation teacher months in which they made at least one sale was considered an active month for them. and then we use that in our calculations. So you can see that those businesses that were making more sales also had more sales through the sanitation teachers. And when we look at the number of sanitation teachers that businesses are retaining per quintile, you can clearly see those at the upper end have on average a lot more sanitation teachers than those in the lower end. So on average, the high-performing latrine businesses had retained close to 6 sanitation teachers per business. However, when we look at the average number of STs per month, so those are on average the number of sanitation teachers who have made at least one sale in a month. Even with the highest performers, it was less than 1. So that tells us that, and we can see this from some other data that we have, there was a lot of turnover, a lot of churn with the sanitation teachers. A lot of sanitation teachers who would sell for a couple of months and then would no longer be selling. And so that became an issue also for our team in Cambodia, and was clearly something that was then driving the strategy going forward to say, how can we reduce the amount of turnover with the sanitation teachers, and how can we make sure that we are getting more out of the sanitation teachers, because it is an investment, obviously, in terms of training and support to maintain this sales force, and they're going to be more effective to the degree that you can actually keep them in the game. So just to recap, like I said, the overall performance was very strong, exceeded the excellent target for sales. We did have this dynamic of relatively few high performers generating most of the sales, and I'd say this is not unusual for a lot of other things that iDEs involved in as well. That we saw a correlation between the sanitation teacher activity and performance, but even among the high performing group, there was a lot of turnover, and we had sanitation teachers who were only selling for short periods of time. And so one of the implications of that from a program point of view was then to really focus on how to better manage the sales force. And in SMSU 2.0, there's now a more hands-on approach to managing the sanitation teachers and coaching them. And so that's clearly a way in which the experience from the first phase has really informed now where we're going in the second phase, and that strategy that Michelle is now leading out. Maybe I'll just pause there for a second and see if there are any questions of clarification just at the end of this first section before we dive into the next piece. Chris, do we have any questions?
No, there hasn't been any questions typed into the box at this point.
Okay, great. So we'll jump into the second part, which is looking at installation and use. So clearly, selling toilets is great, but if people don't install their toilets, and if they don't use them, even if they're installed, then there's not a huge amount of impact in terms of the actual social good that we're after, which is sort of the combination of the public health impact and also offering people greater dignity and sort of the aspiration to moving to using a toilet. And so in order to track this is obviously tricky. We use the customer follow-up surveys. And so as I mentioned before, we had these lists of customers off the big book, the photos that we have, and we took on a rolling basis a random sample of customers from those lists, and then we followed up with a survey. And so we wanted to see 6 to 12 months later, had they actually installed the latrine, and if they had installed it, did they use it? Now, in the first round, we basically relied on verbal reports. So we asked people, do the adults in the household consistently use the toilet? We asked whether the children in the household consistently use the toilet, and we asked whether they were also using the toilet for disposal of infant feces, which is another. And so we collected over a period of time that information on from the survey, also able to capture whether those were poverty line. In Cambodia, there's actually a system which identifies poor households. So we're able to use that, just asking in the survey whether they were, I guess, certified at one of those levels by the government. And so we're getting some statistics as well around reach of the program to for segments of the population. So in terms of use, the important use is certainly among adults if they have installed all or almost. Among children, you'd expect it's a little bit lower. Even in my household, getting children to always use the toilet in the appropriate way is sometimes a challenge. And it's certainly with disposal in the PCs. It was actually common that people would be latrines for latrines. So, and I guess consistent as well with what people have observed anecdotally out in the field. That Cambodia, unlike places, people. But one important dynamic to realize is that in Cambodia, people are aspiring to a nice toilet, one that has often a concrete superstructure, possibly with a washing facility. And so what people have in mind when they're thinking about putting in a toilet is much more than just what the program was selling, which was focused on the in-ground portion. So 3 concrete rings, some PVC pipe collection box, and the slab and pan that sits on top. And so when we looked at the pricing earlier, and you can see the prices ranging sort of in that $50 range, that's just for the in-ground portion. And of course, you could put that in the ground fairly easily and build just a temporary structure around it for the time being, so you can start using it using bamboo or other local materials. But that's clearly not what most people were choosing to do. They were taking the opportunity when there was a sales meeting or door-to-door sales to take advantage of what seemed like a good deal to get the in-ground portion in that price range, $35, $40, $50. But then putting it by the side of the house and just waiting until they'd saved up enough money for the concrete and other bricks or whatever other materials they were needing that they really were aspiring to. And so clearly after 12 months, there were still a lot of people who had the toilet sitting by the side of the house, still waiting to build up the resources in order to install the toilet. And so this becomes then a critical question for us. It seems like once a toilet is in the ground, we don't have a lot of issues with use. But getting the toilet in the ground seems to be still a major barrier for people. And so, to repeat on this one, as I said, those who install it, there don't seem to be a lot of issues with their reported use. But our installation is quite slow. So a couple of things are being looked at then is to say, is it possible that finance or smart subsidy may increase installation rates? If it's an issue of cash flow or access to the money to put the toilet in the ground and build the shelter around it, maybe that's one solution. As well, there's been a lot of focus on improved shelter designs. So lower cost, more affordable, but aspirational designs that people can take advantage of in order to have the type of toilet that they really aspire to, but at a price that allows them to get that installed sooner rather than later. So those are some of the operational implications. And then from a measurement perspective, we're also in the next round wanting to incorporate actual observed indicators of use. So there are people who put together some checklists of various indicators, things like if it's a poor flush latrine, which is the kind of latrine that's in this program where you pour water in to flush it, is there evidence of water around the toilet? That would be one indication people are actually using it. Well-worn path is another one. So if you just look at the path going to the building, does it appear that this is a path that people are actually walking? So you've got sort of long grass and weeds and everything, may indicate that this is not a building that's currently in use. But if you sort of see that kind of well-worn path going to the toilet, that's another indicator that people are actively using it. I don't think that we are all that interested in getting into some of the more intrusive sensors and things like that, where obviously people have gotten to a point in certain projects where they have sensors that, for example, ping off every time the door is open, so you can tell how many times was the door open to the shelter, or motion sensors, things like this. And then people even using things to say, okay, based on how long the person's been in there, we can sort of deduce, what they're using it for. We're not interested in kind of diving into that, literally or figuratively. We're satisfied, I think, especially in this case, that I think with that first statement that we have there, that as long as the toilet is installed, we don't see a huge amount of issue in Cambodia, at least, with use. But again, that question: how do we really ensure that these toilets get installed and get installed sooner rather than later? How can we move that curve? Again, I'll pause here before we dive into the final section of the link, just to see if there's any questions of clarity. Let's move on to the final section here. So pay scale machine discussions foundation. Okay, and either through community-led total sanitation, using kind of a promotional campaign, urging people to materials which are affordable, nor and so how do we know that we're actually able to reach a broader section? How do we know that this is an effective strategy based up of toilets? And so we worked with a research group called ID Insight, and they helped us put together looking at willingness to is go out and ask how much would you be willing to pay for a toilet, and people will give you answers, but typically what we find is people tend to underestimate their willingness to pay. So, oh yeah, I'd pay $70 for it. But if you came back that same day and said, okay, I've got toilets in the truck here, they're $70, a smaller percentage of people would actually say, oh, okay, yes, I will buy one. So that's called stated willingness to pay. When you ask somebody, how much are you willing to pay, and they tell you. And it's not considered a hugely reliable measure of what people are actually willing to pay. The other method of doing willingness to pay is called revealed willingness to pay. And that's where you actually observe people's behavior, which is a much more reliable way of seeing whether people are actually willing to pay that. So what that means is if somebody pays $70 for a toilet, or if somebody pays $50 for a toilet, I can be pretty certain that they're willing to pay $50 or $70 for a toilet because they just did. And so we put together a trial where we went out into a particular doing this, ran through the usual sales presentation. And one way to do it would be to just randomly allocate prices and say, okay, in this village, I'm going to offer the toilet $30. And in this village, off the toilet, $50. In this village, $60. And see what percentage uptake I get. We use a game, the BDM game, the Becker de Groot Marshak game, named for its designers. And it's more like a bidding game. And the way that it works in simple terms is I say, look, I've got a collection of random prices in a bag here. And what I want you to do is tell me how much you'd be willing to pay for the toilet. And the way the game works is I'm going to pull a price out of the bag. If the price that I pull out is lower than the price you gave me, you get it for that lower price. So it's an opportunity for you to get a discount. But if the price that I pull out is higher, you can't buy. So it really gives a person an incentive to say, what really is the highest price I'm willing to pay? Because there's no benefit in telling somebody a lower price than you're willing to pay. Because if I said $30 and then the researcher pulled $40 out of the bag, I wouldn't be able to get it at $40, even if in my head, it said, oh, I'm actually willing to pay $50. So I just missed out on a possible $10 discount. So people then tend to give you much closer to what their real willingness is. $50, I'll say around $50, and hey, I might just get lucky and you'll pull $20 out of the bag and I get it for half price. So we did this game, and that allows you then to make a curve, which shows you, I'll just show you here, as price goes up, you can see the willingness to pay going down. And the bottom curve that you see there is the curve that we got initially, which was indicating that about 12% of people who didn't have a toilet were willing to pay at $50 market price. And so that was a relatively low willingness to pay at market price. And so we wanted to ask what mechanisms could we use in order to make that better. And working with PATH, we developed a sanitation finance project. And so we wanted to know what would be the impact of finance on willingness to pay. And so what we did was we then, in one province, in Kampong Thom, we took villages and we randomly allocated some villages to receive the finance package and some villages for it just to be cash on delivery. And so it went through the same process, did the sales pitch, the sales presentation, and at the end played this game saying how much would you be willing to pay, and I'm going to pull a price out of a bag. The difference was in the villages that we had randomly allocated to receive financing, instead of bidding on the overall price of the toilet, they were bidding on what they would pay as a monthly payment for an installment plan for a financed purchase. And so then what we wanted to see was how did it compare in villages where we just offered it as cash on delivery, what were people willing to pay, versus what people were willing to pay if it was an installment plan and they were able to pay over a number of months with interest. And so when we ran the numbers on this, we found that at that market price of $50, 12% of those who were paying cash were willing, sorry, 12% of people who didn't have latrines were willing to pay cash, but 50% were willing to purchase on a loan. And again, this is not just them telling us that they would be willing, but this is them actually making a purchase with a loan or without a loan. And so we could see that there was a fourfold increase in uptake of toilets when the finance product was available. And this was actually, I think, stronger than we were necessarily expecting. And it was quite a striking result that when you offer finance, you get this kind of uptake. And so clearly, this needs to be one of the tools for going deeper with coverage of sanitation. Although one of the observations has been, at this point, we've got a very effective finance product, obviously, but the real limitation now is the actual capacity of the microfinance institutions to offer it. So their internal capacity to, in terms of field staff management, in terms of monitoring systems, etc., that now seems to be the limiting factor in really scaling up access to finance. And so that's where we need to find better solutions. And so you can see here, this is just showing kind of a similar result, but just showing you at that market price, you can see quite starkly the difference between the uptake without a loan and the uptake with a loan, 50% versus 12% for a fold increase. So just to sum up the final section here, as I said, at market price, about 12% of non-latrine owners were willing to purchase. When we had the sanitation finance product, we were able to push that up to 50%. But in terms of going to scale, there's still a lot of issues with capacity within the MFIs to be able to actually deliver that finance to customers. And so that's one area for additional work. And it's great to say we got 50% uptake with finance, but that also means you had 50% rejection. And so the question is, what is it going to take to reach that other 50% of non-latrine owners? And that's where we believe there's still a role for subsidy here to reach further and get more broad-based uptake. Because again, if you go back to the curves here, you can see as the price goes down, so right toward the left side of the chart, you can see you're approaching 100% willingness to pay. And so if there's ways of pushing back on that curve for those who are not willing to pay at the market price, that may help us also to increase uptake beyond what we're already able to do. And one of the challenges here is then how do we do that in a way that doesn't involve offering subsidy to those who are already willing to pay with cash or those who are already willing to pay with finance. So you're only targeting the subsidy to those who really, really need it. And that's what we call smart subsidy, is that kind of targeted subsidy where you're not just offering it as a blanket, but can it be something that's embedded in the way you offer it so it gets to those who otherwise would not be willing to pay. So again, just to repeat overall, some of the implications of the findings that we presented here, moving to a stronger focus on the sales agent, the sanitation teacher. In fact, now what Cambodia is doing is really approaching a social enterprise model where IDE is actively managing a sales force. And the latrine businesses are much more like suppliers, with IDE passing on orders to the latrine businesses as a way of trying to make it easier for the latrine businesses and kind of manage their flow of orders so that they're not either having massive backlogs or having dry periods. On installation, just to reiterate again, our key challenge there is getting customers to install faster. Some combination potentially of finance and subsidy, and also looking at affordable shelter designs as a way of trying to drive that. We need to find a way to scale up access to sanitation finance, and that means addressing some of the capacity issues that currently exist among the MFIs. And we do believe that there is a role for smart subsidy to reach 100% coverage as quickly as possible. I know in some circles that kind of runs counter to what people see as sort of the ideology of IDE, but I think there's also kind of an interesting dynamic with sanitation because there is actually an endpoint here. We're driving toward 100% coverage, and then the market will change entirely to being much more market about just toilets for new houses and replacements and things like that, but not this big drive to make the use of toilets something that is 100% across the board. So there's a rundown of kind of the methods that we used and what we found, and some of how that's being applied to actual practice. And there is a report which we'd be more than happy to share, which summarizes this and also a number of other factors that we looked at. But these are really the highlights that we wanted to put out in this presentation. And with that, I will close out the presentation and open it up for questions and for discussion. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Stu. A few questions kind of came in while you were talking, and so I just want to be sure that those are addressed. So I have a summary here. But just to finish on maybe the last point that Stu said, kind of things that are happening now. This is kind of these are all analyses that have been done in the past couple of years. But currently, linking together the installation and use question with the willingness to pay question, we are working with some researchers from University of Maryland, as well as some of our friends at ID Insight, to see if there's actually a link between willingness to pay, or actually the price people paid, and then their probability of installation and using. So kind of linking together those two analyses in a way. And that ultimately helps us to also answer the question around the impact of subsidy on installation and use. So not only impact of subsidy on purchase, but the important part, which is installation and use, which we're also working with some additional researchers from a group called Causal Design to kind of design or develop the optimal subsidy amount to result in the highest number of sales and hopefully the highest number of installations and ultimately use. And so kind of this hasn't stopped here. I think the three kind of analyses that Stu summarized are kind of the beginning, and we do see some additional opportunities as we move into SMSU 2.0 to continue learning and continuing to kind of invest in these types of smart measurement and kind of measurement geared for management decisions. So keep your eyes out as we kind of continue to share some of the results trickling in from those two pieces of research, as well as what Stu mentioned. There's quite a bit of other stuff included in the SMSU1 kind of final documentation. But to get to some of the questions, Stu, so going back to the sales and business analysis, Raisa asked the question about what were the factors for STs being considered not active in your chart, I believe on slide 10 or so, the one talking about active ST months. So what was the criteria for an ST to be considered inactive?
So, Race, make sure that we're answering your question. I think there's the one thing, sort of, how did we define active or inactive? But then there's also, I see a question here about saying the factors for STs not being active, which for me would indicate maybe more like some of the reasons why they weren't active. On the first question, for active, we just very simply said if they made sales, any sales at all in this month, then they were considered active in that month. But there was definitely a lot of coming and going. In terms of why, we didn't do a lot of analysis in this particular evaluation. In retrospect, it would have been good to have more kind of formal analysis of some of the ST experience. But there's certainly a lot of insight from more kind of qualitative work, the close interaction that the team had with them. As I understand it, I mean, part of it is that at least initially, the STs didn't necessarily have like a really strong sense of commitment or connection even to the latrine businesses. In some cases, they were local people who had helped facilitate a few sales. But there are also other factors, in terms of opportunity costs and whatnot, to getting involved, and that's something that the team is now trying to address. One of the things that they're doing is offering a very small stipend for each half day that an ST is active, and active in that sense meaning that they have given group sales presentation or have met with at least 5 households in a half day to be considered active for that period, and then they get a small stipend each month for that activity as a way of just trying to create an incentive for them to stay connected, to stay active even when maybe the orders aren't coming in quite as quickly as they would like. I'd also invite Michelle. Michelle, if you're on and able, I don't know if you have a quick comment on that question of factors that are affecting the ability of the STs to really be consistently outselling.
I'm just unmuted. Can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you just fine.
Okay, I assume that everybody can hear me then. Well, for the question about what are the reasons why AST become inactive or are dropping after a while, I would like to say that this is the case of any commission-only sales force. Our sales force, those STs are trained by a consulting firm, an American consulting firm called WRP, who is really teaching the sales force management as it's being used in many parts of the world, including in the US. to manage large number of sales agents who are on commission only. So they are very, very experienced in this with this type of sales force. And they were telling me from the beginning that typically in the US, for this type of sales force, which is paid on a commission only, the turnover is 75%. That means that you will have 3 people out of 4 who will drop out within a year. And this is something that we have to live with when we have a sales force with a small basic salary. So you're right, Stu, in mentioning that we are still trying to minimize this turnover, although it won't disappear and it will still be big. You are mentioning the stipend, the allowance that we are giving, and I think this stipend, we had a budget in SMSU too for paying the ST, having not a salary, it would not qualify as salary, but allowing them to have an allowance of up to $50 per month per ST. So this is budgeted, but we have to think how we would spend that money in SMSU too. And we have realized that as job provider, because this is what we are, we provide jobs to people who can become agents, but we are in competition with a lot of other job providers, such as factories, MFIs. We are not the only one to offer, thanks God, to offer a job in rural Cambodia, and we are competing. And not offering a fixed salary, of course, we are at a disadvantage. However, the advantage of the type of job we're offering is that it can potentially be very flexible in terms of the number of hours worked, the number of days worked. For example, it can be a convenient additional activity for a school teacher, or it can be a convenient activity for a woman who has responsibility at home, with kids, for example, and that could not go for full-time employment as being offered by the factories or the MFIs. And that led us to design an allowance which is not like a salary, because that would kind of encourage us to find only full-time people. But as you said, as a stipend, if you work half a day, and if you can prove that you've worked half a day with a not a sales record, but an activity report that shows that you've made either group sales or 5 direct sales during your half days, then you are allowed to have the equivalent of $1.5. This small stipend is used to, in fact, remove the loss aversion. Any sales person will tell you that there are times where, you know, you have to cross a bad time. You don't make a sale for a week. But in the case of our STs, this is very painful, because it means not only no income, but as it was designed in the SMSU 1, where they were on commission only without any stipends or allowance, that means real negative cash flow. That's, you know, lost money in gasoline and in lunch taking outside. So we want to remove this loss aversion from the equation, so that even if a salesperson, a competent salesperson, is having a bad track, he doesn't have to suffer a negative cash flow for this period of time, and that at least it's cash neutral on his own pocket money. To you, Stu.
Great, thank you, Michel.
Michel, while you're still unmuted, there was another question from Dana about some program modifications under SMSU 2 in terms of finance, smart subsidy, and what is happening in terms of affordable shelter design. Could you comment maybe on just a brief summary across the finance side and the shelter design under SMSU 2?
Sure. Absolutely. On the finance side, as Stu mentioned, the biggest challenge is that the MFI don't necessarily have the capacity to process the loan application for very small amounts. Here we are talking 50 US dollar. It's hard to motivate a bank to do a microloan on such a small amount, and especially when there are so many, potentially so many of them. So for the finance, we are trying, in fact, to we are testing a pilot where we sell bundles on credit, which is the underground part of the toilet, and water filter from our social enterprise Hydrologic, so that it's a bigger ticket. And a team, a consultant called Amplify, is driving this pilot project with a special arrangement with Vision Fund. So this is being tested. At the same time, we have in Cambodia the department called ID Credit, which has been extending credit for mainly Hydrologic, for the water filter, which we hope to be able to use also ourselves, because that would remove a lot of difficulties we have working with microfinance institutions to be able to extend the credit by ourselves. So this department is supported with Kiva, the online social crowdfunding website, which is extending some capital for us to be able our own internal credit department. We are, however, here facing some regulation issues with some laws in Cambodia which require registration and a number of hurdles to be passed before the WASH program can use this internal credit tool. So that was for finance. On the smart subsidy, the same company who is doing the bundle pilot has been engaged for another pilot, which would test subsidies. And the originality of these subsidies is that it would be included in the microfinancing package. In fact, the repayment, it will be a sale with microfunding, but the customer would not have to pay in full back the loan. So it's like a rebate at the end, where they would only repay $30, for example, of the $50 principal because of a subsidy component in the mix. The number I give you are wrong. It's not going to be $20 out of 50. We don't know yet, and this is part of what the pilot will test. And last, for the shelter, we have actually not one but two shelter prototype being tested at the moment, and the shelter is still going to be a big ticket item. I was discussing with Watershell, the other big WASH NGO in Cambodia, and they came up with an affordable shelter, but we don't manage to get a shelter in the field for less than $200. It's more likely to be $300. So it's a significant jump from the $50, which is the underground part of the latrine. I think that the key for the shelter is to make it affordable, but also to bring the microcredit. At this level, it's going to be difficult to sell massive amounts of shelter unless there is a microfunding plan for it. I hope this answered the question to you.
Great, thank you very much, Michel. Stu, there was a question on installation and use, and do we have any insights as to why the households or the families are waiting to buy or like why they purchase the underground and wait. Oh wait, sorry. Let me say this again. Do we know why they wait to buy, why they buy the underground when they don't necessarily have enough money to buy the above ground components? I believe that's what the question was, Trang. If I said that incorrectly, please let me know. But basically, why is there a lag between purchasing underground and purchasing above ground as opposed to just waiting until you have enough money for both at the same time?
Right. I mean, I'll give my impressions. Again, this is something that we don't necessarily have like a lot of data to go back on as far as the reasons for that. But it seems to be consistent with how people make other investments, you know, where you are building a house or other things like that, where you'll kind of do it bit by bit as you have money coming in, and where cash flow is an issue, you know, you kind of invest piece by piece. As you have money to buy particular materials or particular components, you buy those and just sort of slowly amass what you need in order to do the construction and installation. So that's one piece. And I think another is that the way in which the sales process has worked has really been emphasizing the value. And you know, one of the things in the sales process is you're trying to minimize objections right now and move to a point where a person is ready to make the purchase, recognizing that when there's a delay in terms of decision, then you tend to have a lot of people who end up kind of dropping out and not coming back. And so there is a certain emphasis in the sales process to moving people toward making that decision to purchase. And so I think that's also part of the process, is people are recognizing right now they're being offered good value, and so might as well take advantage of that, because you don't know necessarily if that's going to be available to you, say, a year from now. And that's certainly something that I think the project has been shooting for, recognizing that if you can get to a point of people at least making the investment in the underground, then they're underway. You know, like they're on their way to having a toilet fully installed, even if, as we see from the data, that journey may take a while to get there.
I would add that indeed, I think the sales methodology is trying to get that impulse purchase after a presentation, and that once the purchase is made, some households decide that it's better to call the mason only once for doing the underground and the shelter. And that this aspirational shelter, unfortunately, has been cause for delays of the installation of the underground structure. So that's one of the big lessons learned from the data that the M&E team has gathered in SMSU 1. And the way we are addressing this issue is we are in fact retooling our sales force to only indicate the price, installation included, and to push and encourage the LBOs to provide installation service, and only making sure that a purchase without installation is more an exception than the rule.
Okay, so another question came in from Dana, and it was, how long does it take to produce these results for SMSU 1? Is it feasible to have them during the life of the project so that they are integrated into the management of the same project, in case if there is no phase 2, as in the case of SMSU 2? And I think I can kind of answer that one, and Stu, you can chime in as necessary as well. In this case, these 3 studies kind of took place over the course of SMSU 1 and did, in fact, begin affecting decisions over the life of SMSU 1. For instance, the willingness to pay study, which the main kind of thing that revealed is that financing is important and that it's very, very important. That was midway. We ended up having those results pretty early on in SMSU 1. And midway through SMSU 1, the team began to develop kind of an operational model that would provide financing at scale. Now, there's a difference between learning something in the context of an experiment and then creating an operational version of that can be scaled up. And so that took some time. But similarly, I think if you look at the business sales metrics, again, we are kind of keeping track of and having similar versions of that analysis over the course of SMSU1, and the team was gleaning insights from that and making modifications for how LBOs could be trained and how they could kind of work with their STs. The difference here is that in the transition of SMSU 2.0, it really did allow for some pretty significant changes to that design that may have been outside of the scope of the terms of what was, under the umbrella of SMSU 1. And then lastly, I just want to comment on a different example, kind of outside of the WASH world. I think your point is really, your question is really good, Dana, in that how do we take this type of analysis and apply it during the course of the project in a way that allows for the project to change. And in the case of here in Zambia, on the agricultural side, we have this thing that we call the Refine project, which we're actually going to talk about in a few months' time on the next iCall. But essentially, it's figuring out a way. Essentially, we have a partnership with ID Insight to carry out rapid design trials or operational research trials to test these operational decisions or test these operational models alongside one another during the course of the project, and refine the project as a result. And so far we've carried out 2 full research activities. The first is related to how do we successfully recruit farm business advisors and identify the most positive traits leading to success. And the second being kind of what operationally is the most lucrative. How can FBAs make the most money from the current model as it is designed? And so we're actually trying to answer this question now, Dana, as how do we integrate this into program design, and how do we integrate this into program implementation? And I think we're learning as we go, and we're learning which partnerships need to be in place in order to do that more successfully and more effectively in a tighter timeline, while still learning kind of meaningful things that can lead to program changes. Stu, would you have anything to add to that?
I think that's very well explained, Chris. I mean, the only thing I want to do is just underscore the importance of this question, and I think some of the methods that were developed through the SMSU project, more broadly for IDE, that when we look at our M&E processes, we really do want to emphasize real-time information as much as possible, and not I mean, as much as possible, not having everything rely sort of on the baseline, midline, endline kind of evaluation where you get all your results right at the end. But this combination of sort of ongoing tracking in real time of as many of the variables as possible, the rolling customer follow-up surveys, which give us more insights on the customer experience and the actual use of the products and services, as well as being able to give us things like a profile of poverty levels and things like that in terms of the market that we're reaching, and getting regular updates on basic business metrics for the business partners we're working with. All of these are mechanisms that are easily transferable to other IDE programs, whether they're WASH or agriculture or whatever. Because in most cases, we're working with business partners offering products and services on a real-time basis. There are customers, there are certain things we want to know about those customers, and then we have specific operational and strategic questions around which, rather than just sort of having like one big heavy evaluation, having smaller, rapid, more nimble ways of answering those questions as we go through the course of the project gives us a lot more scope for really influencing the direction of the project as we go. And also when those those trials or those kind of mini research projects are well constructed, they often give us, in the end, more insight into the impact, often, of the project than the more kind of traditional approach. Especially in a case where, with IDE, we don't know who the customers are going to be. Probably the heaviest part of this, actually, which we didn't really talk about in this presentation, but with also kudos to Vinny, who's on the call. We did a series of latrine counts, so every year went out, and this was a huge exercise because we were trying to estimate the change in coverage at a provincial level for each of the 7 provinces. And so I think by the end we were reaching something like 200,000 households we were visiting, and this would last for 2 to 3 months. Huge effort on the part of the Cambodia team to pull this off. And then we did some analysis of the changes in coverage. And I mean, this was where you could really see the dent at a provincial level across the whole program, across 7 provinces in Cambodia, for the entire rural population. The coverage of improved latrines jumped about 15% over the course of not even 3 complete years, really, because we really started into the scale-up in earnest at the start of 2012 and ran the final latrine count in sort of centering around August of 2014. And Vinny, who's on the call, did a fantastic job with an atlas of maps, sort of showing province by province changes in coverage and the final sales results. So some of those things can, give us important information about the impact we've had at a larger scale. Don't necessarily give us as much kind of real-time operational information, and so we could do that in a bit of a heavier, slower way. Although even there, we had annual check-ins, so we were generating results as we went along, and so you could see over the course of a 3-year project if there are questions being raised by those data as well. So that's all just to underscore the importance of Dana's question, and that I think that's a really big priority for us in terms of global IQ support, is how might we, across our programs, engage in measurement that as much as possible is being driven by the operational decisions that we need to make and is driven by real-time information, rapid trials, trying to turn things around with a speed that allows our managers to make good decisions on the basis of the additional information that it's providing.
Okay, so there's just one last question that I've received so far, and that's from Raisa. And the question, which I don't know who the best person to answer would be, but the question is, in the Cambodian context, are toilets always installed outside of the house? And she's specifically referencing some of the indicators you mentioned regarding observed use. So whether or not there were some other indicators in addition to kind of the observed path indicator.
Yeah, for myself, I mean, again, maybe this is something that Michelle would have more insight on in terms of the prevalence of outside versus inside toilets. From my understanding, the vast majority are outbuildings. I don't think in my travels I've come across inside installations in Cambodia. I have in Nepal, but I don't think in Cambodia I have personally. But in terms of the indicators of use, not all of them are specific to an outdoor installation like the well-worn path. I mean, things like the presence of water for flushing, and other things sort of around the toilet, those would apply equally to indoor installations as well as outdoor installations. I mean, I did find it interesting in the indicators of use, one of them is sort of almost evidence of like soiling around the toilet or whatnot. And obviously that's, to some extent, on the one hand, you're sort of looking at how clean is the toilet being kept. On the other hand, you're sort of looking at that as an indicator of use. So there are some complications around some of those things, but I would say by and large, the indicators would translate for indoor as well as outdoor installations. But that's something that we can also circulate a proposed list of indicators if that's helpful for people on the call. Raisa, does that answer your question? Great.
So that is all the questions I've received, I believe, unless I've left somebody out. But I think we're also coming close to we're at the hour 15-minute mark. So if there are no other questions, then I think that may well be it. Anybody? Any other questions? Hearing
I've got just one question, or maybe a clarification.
Okay.
Could you guys, I'm a big fan, obviously, of using all this IQ for management. Could you talk a little bit about how the Cambodia team funded this stuff, just so some of the other programs can keep that in mind as they're building budgets, et cetera?
Yep. So some of this, certainly the willingness to pay work, was courtesy of some dedicated funds that were put in by the Gates Foundation from the outset. So they had actually sequestered some money in the budget for specifically research. And so we were able to take that money. We already knew we had it before even having to propose exactly what the research was, which was a really nice kind of space to be in. And that's something we've actually tried to emulate in other programs now as well, going after specific research money alongside program grant. So that's one strategy where there are funders out there who are interested in funding good operational research. And so the money that we have in Zambia to do the emergent evaluation that Chris was talking about earlier, the REFINE project, that's a dedicated research and evaluation project, which is linked to a CETA-funded grant. But CETA is the main kind of CETA grant is able to be more focused on implementation, and then we have kind of this alongside grant that allows us to do this more in-depth research and evaluation work. We have a similar type of project now also coming online in Cambodia to follow through on some of the next generation on the finance and subsidy work. And that's being funded through a special DFAC grant that was made available for doing this kind of evaluation. And so as a team, I mean, we're interested in working with country teams to identify where there are opportunities to put together specific proposals for linking research to the work that we're doing. So that's one piece. And then on the evaluation side, I mean, a lot of that then was written into budgets right from the get-go. So Cambodia did have a fairly substantial commitment to M&E. There was money written in at the outset for the monitoring system. So what we were seeing here in terms of the use of mobile phones and Salesforce and whatnot was written into the budget from the outset. Again, that's something that we can help with when initially scoping a budget to say, you know, here's a quote for how much it's going to cost when you look at the time for development, the licensing costs, the device costs, things like that, so that can get brought in right at the start of the budget. The other thing that Cambodia did was they had a set of dedicated research assistants who were the ones who really drove the collection of sales data going along, the collection of the business data, and the customer follow-up surveys. And then they also did the latrine counts. So they're a very busy group of people. But that was a cadre of about 15, 16 staff who were hired through the project, budgeted right from the start, who had full-time salaries and travel budget to be able to do this. So a lot of this involved, you know, from the outset, making sure that those resources were in place to be able to support this range of measurement efforts. So that's kind of how this how this was worked. It was a combination of those evaluation M&E costs that were kind of embedded within the program itself, plus then the funding that was outside of that that was provided through this more dedicated research grant. And I see Dana is asking about an indication of the costs themselves. To be honest, Dana, the embedded costs in the SMSU grant, I don't have right at the top of my head. I would have to look that one up. The cost for the research, in the end, initially, the Gates Foundation had actually sequestered $500,000 for research. In the end, what we ended up using of that was closer to $250,000 for all of the willingness to pay studies and the research that went on there. So that was clearly, it's not a small budget item. But again, funded through a more dedicated grant, and we have been able to get other grants, kind of in the range of say $100,000 to $200,000 for dedicated research that's going alongside the programs. But like I say, I'm sorry, I don't have right off the top of my head the size of the M&E budget for SMSU. Michelle, I don't know if that's something that you have an idea of off the top of your head.
No, sorry, I don't have the budget figures for SMSU one on the top of my head. But I take the opportunity to add that a lot of data was obviously generated through the normal M&E function. Some other studies were generated by dedicated budget from often involving consultants. For me, what was really very impactful was the last mile, which was made on the top of the M&E data to make the information presentable and insightful. So the business report that you have presented was absolutely stunning in terms of insight it gave us on the latrine business owner. We could know their margin province by province, and that was really I don't think there were a big budget attached to these reports because most of the data was there, but that last mile really was very meaningful. And another area, and you mentioned that, I'm glad you did that, kudos for Vinny who put your data into those atlas. So using mapping to make the data talk. Again, Vinny, I don't mean that you're cheap, but I don't think it was the biggest budget envelope to have this last mapping treatment of the M&E data, and that turned out to be very impactful for ourselves, for the insight, and also to communicate back to the donor. And here I have to mention also Casey, who did a great job at putting this raw data into very stunning presentations. Thank you.
Thanks, Michelle. That's a fantastic point. I love the idea of the last mile for M&E data, and I completely agree. The work that Vinny has put in, and just what those atlases add, and the work that Casey has done. Again, these are sort of much smaller kind of incremental costs to take all of that data and put it into a format that is really compelling both for internal and also external use. And that's something that we've been trying to push for as well, is to think about when you're budgeting projects, not just a budget for the collection of the information, but also think about having just a small budget in there for putting everything together into, say, a set of briefing notes, and having those designed and published. It can make a huge difference for the degree to which data actually get out there and get used versus just sitting in a file somewhere that we forget about rather quickly. And so that whole, I'm going to use that from now on, the last mile for M&E data is really a great example of where very small incremental investments can have a huge impact. And I see Dana has asked a question about how transferable are these studies to other IDE country programs, and is there a global process in place for this? Well, Dana, congratulations, you're part of the global process. These calls are kind of one step toward trying to take the data and the findings out of just program reports and find venues for us to easily engage with the data across our programs. Even this presentation, we're wanting to attract not just a WASH crowd, but a broader IDE crowd, because there are certainly a lot of lessons that are quite transferable. I think from a measurement point of view, there's a lot of lessons we've learned in the SMSU process that we're now applying across a whole number of projects that are not WASH in nature and are in other countries. Just having to do with how do we most effectively monitor sales activity, business metrics, put that together with a rolling customer survey that's getting that customer experience and feedback and profile, and rolling in rapid trials where possible. All of these things, I think, are lessons that we've learned from a management perspective, or from a measurement perspective, that we're applying definitely across other countries and other programs. And so the global process at this point would be the global IQ team that's able to take lessons from one place and apply it in another. Putting together a fora like this seminar, and also, as we just spoke about with the last mile, trying to put out briefing notes and materials that are easily accessible, can be used by a wide range of people across the organization. In terms of the actual learnings, I think that there's also some broader applications. Obviously, the learnings presented here are specific to Cambodia, but I think the deeper you go, you can then start to tease out what are some lessons from here that could apply equally in Nepal, for example, or in Bangladesh. And it's just teasing apart those things, like the question that that Raisa had asked about, how does this apply to indoor versus outdoor, etc. I think we want to be a little bit careful. Things like the willingness to pay study is a very powerful piece and has gotten a lot of play. And what I've tried to really emphasize is, this is about a specific finance product in a specific context. There's a lot of specifics about it. Yes, the results are very compelling, but we do have to be careful about saying, therefore, any sanitation finance product in any location is going to increase. Or even, as well, using this as sort of a broader platform for talking about the impact of finance more broadly on our work, which is all great, but I think we just have to be careful about saying, okay, what are the things that are transferable? What are the things that are specific? But I think generally, I guess I can't go into too much detail now. We're at the half-hour mark, but my broad answer, Dana, would be yes. These are, I think, quite transferable in terms of methods and in terms of findings, and we're trying to get better at how we spread that across. But it's a combination of the global IQ support, having fora where people can hear and see the results, hear discussion of them, and be able to dive in, and the kinds of materials that we're able to produce to make those more easily digestible and accessible. I hope that gets a little bit at your question. So I think we'll need to wrap up here. We had budgeted this for an hour and a half, and we're now at the hour and a half mark. We're still learning as we go here in terms of these presentations. This has been by far the best as far as the platform that we're using, thanks to i2i, IDE's HR firm, for providing the GoToMeeting platform. Way better than Skype. We've been recording, and so we will make the recording available shortly. We would also really, really appreciate your feedback and comments on how we can do this better going forward, because you'll see that there is a series of iCalls. We would love for you to remain engaged, to participate in future calls, and really have that kind of active participation across the community. And like I say, really to hear your comments and your feedback on how we can continue to improve these calls, because we really do want this to be an effective venue across IDE for people to be able to engage with results, perspectives from different country programs, so that we can really spread the learning around. And thanks, Chris, for organizing all of this. Much appreciated. I don't know if there's any closing words you have before we sign off.
You're welcome. It's been great. I think this is definitely the best one we've had so far. And just a plug, iCall number 5 and iCall number 6 are on the calendar. So iCall number 5 is going to be September 1st at 7 a.m. Denver time. And iCall number 6 will be December 1st. So September 1st and December 1st will be the next two iCalls. Yeah, and I will be releasing the details on the topics very shortly within the next week or so. But one of them will be based on the Refine initiative here in Zambia, and it's likely that we will be discussing some of the impact audit work that some of our country programs have been done. So look out for some updates. Thank you very much for joining us. Please let us know if you have any recommendations or suggestions. And have a wonderful week, everybody.
All right, thanks everyone.
Bye.